Yeah, you ready for a question?
I'm ready for a question.
All right, so this one is, people who transitioned, how quickly did it take for society to start treating you differently? I'm sorry if this sounds like a dumb or random question, and I really don't mean for this to come off as an insensitive way. I'm cis, I just had this random thought. But people who transitioned, how long did it take for when you first started transitioning for people to start treating you differently solely based on the gender you now present as? Also, what were some of the changes and what do you now identify as? If you don't, we don't have to answer all that, guys, present, because we already know what we identify as. So, I mean, as in, do people compliment or make random conversations more or less? How do their mannerisms change when they first see you? Did your salary change? How do you feel doing certain things now that you transitioned? Do you feel better or worse doing them now than you did before, etc.?
That is a fucking really good question. And I gotta say, like, I actually love when cis people ask these questions. A lot of times it can get a picture painted that trans people resent cis people, and that's not true. Like, it's not uniformly true. It's not fair because most cis people are cool. I'm friends with a lot of cis people, and most people are just good people. And it doesn't matter that trans cis, like, what we just want is just everyone to just get along. But the thing is you have to understand the reason that trans people seem to have issues with cis people is because the only shit we get ever comes from cis people. Trans people do not give each other shit. So all the shit that we get comes from cis people. So that's why that comes across. So when we get a question from a cis person reaching out, asking, wants to know more, wants to understand it, well, that's like the whole point of what we're doing here. And it makes me really happy. Lilith, what do you have to say about that?
I feel like it really didn't start for me. It was a while because I wore wigs, but now that I've been like growing my own hair and had that taken care of and stuff like that, I feel like as long as I don't talk, I feel like I pass. But I also don't think about that. As for like things that like my salary didn't change. My salary changed because I quit my job. I got an amazing new job that pays way more. Yeah. And like, how do I feel about certain things? Like, I feel like, I don't know if it was my transition is maybe more about changing who I was, but like I used to be super, super way unhealthily into sports. I still enjoy sports now and then. And but like the idea of like sitting down and watching a game at home just doesn't appeal to me. So I feel like we've talked about this before, where like you have all these things that you've set up to project what you think you should be and who you should be. And so I feel like I've dropped a lot of that just naturally because I've stopped being that person. But, you know, there are still some things I'm interested in.
I'll pause you just there because I just want to jump in and say also, like, in addition to that, like, because everything you said is true, but on top of that, like the hormones do change your perspective.
The hormones do, yes.
Some of it's you're dropping things because you're not looking to keep up that route. Sometimes it's just like you just don't like the same stuff.
One thing I heard is that after you transition, if you start taking hormones, there's like a percentage of people who don't like cilantro. And I used to be that kind of person that tastes soapy, and now I can eat cilantro and it doesn't taste soapy. So that changed.
Oh,
but
I don't know anyone likes cilantro. Like, it's like the best tasting thing.
Yeah. The other day I was at the store and I was waiting to get some butter, and there was an older couple standing there and they weren't really doing anything. And the old lady saw me. She's like, "Oh, move, dear. She needs to get the butter." And I was like, "Yeah, I do." But I feel like it's kind of hard to read because of the way the world is now.
I think most places, there's very few people that are looking for a fight.
Yeah.
This is something I faced like early on in my transition. And it's a tricky one because when you first start transitioning and you don't pass, people will respect it. They'll gender you correctly. And there's a bunch of people that don't also.
I think your results may vary depending on where you live.
Results may vary also. There's a little piece of like life advice for that specific situation, which is if you get a compliment or if someone respects you, like, assume it's real. Assume they mean it. Don't read into it like, well, what do they mean by that? Like, are they fucking with me? They're not. Yeah. If someone compliments you, accept it gracefully and thank them. And believe in your heart that they meant it, because everyone does. So, but the thing with, like, when did people start treating you different? That's such a good question, but it's so much more complicated than that because it's layered. It's graduated. They start treating you different in different ways at different stages. You get treated differently as soon as you come out. As soon as you tell someone, they start looking at you differently, and they start treating you differently.
I was thinking about that because like everyone I came out to, all my friends were like accepting and stuff. And I think this is more like you went to the grocery store, and what did some jerk at the grocery store you don't know, when did they start calling you ma'am or whatever?
Well, I'm just saying, like, that's like an example. Like, so immediately is one answer, but it depends on how you also handle your transition. Like, coming out is one thing, starting HRT is another. A lot of people, like Lilith, didn't start HRT for a couple of years, but I did. I started it right away. But even though I started HRT, I didn't immediately go femme. I did this thing where I, instead of injecting femininity, tried to like reduce masculinity. I aimed for gender neutral. My goal was, I'm going to take away masculinity. And if I can get to the point where people can't tell the difference, then I can like kind of step through the looking glass and go the other direction. But I didn't want to just like jump into it right away because I just didn't feel comfortable doing that. And so I tried to do it gradually because transitions are gradual. But here's the wild thing. People started treating you different in different ways, and they start treating you differently in ways that you don't expect. And one of the first things that really threw me off was I had this friend that I worked with. It was a younger fella, and we were friends. Like, we were definitely friends. And I transitioned, and then I lost my job at that place. And then I ended up hanging out with him about like 4 months after I'd been fired, and like it was some thing with a bunch of other people we worked with, and we were all just hanging out doing a thing, and he and I ended up like staying a little later than everybody else. And then we're like, you want to go get something to eat? I was like, yeah, I'd love to go get something to eat. We went to a restaurant. And when we got to the restaurant, he opened the door for me. He talked to the hostess, and he pulled out my chair for me. And he treated it like a fucking date. And it was weird, and I was not ready for this. This is a guy that I'd had a platonic relationship for like a year prior to this, and so I did not know what was going on because I'd spent my whole life being the person that opens doors for other people. Like, oh, you go first. But eventually people not only open doors for you, they expect you to go through them. And so you have to learn, like, oh, yes, I am going to go first.
Oh, yes,
like,
of course.
You have to learn that behavior. And it is wild. And so that's one of the things that happens. People treat you differently when you're in the early stages of your transition and you don't pass. And then they treat you way differently when you do. Everything's so gradual because everything about a transition is slow and takes a really long time.
Also depends on like what you're doing. Like I worked like a year. I worked retail. I was transitioning. It was the worst. Like everyone comes in like, thank you, sir. And you're just like, it's ma'am. And they're like, okay, sir. It's just like, then here's the thing you realize is so people don't pay attention to anything. Everyone has different, if you want to have a fight at a store with someone you're going to have a 30-second conversation with because they use sir instead of ma'am, and you want to go through the effort of correcting them and make that happen, knock yourself out. For me, it's just like, it's a shitty job I don't want to do. It's just next, get out of the fucking way, next person. I'm not here for it. But like I said, if I don't speak to people, like I assume I pass pretty well, and my voice sometimes gives me away, but like I said, everyone comes at different. I'm callous enough, I guess. I don't give a shit. But that also takes some just different personalities and different of, what you're willing to do if the things come to stuff. Like if someone wants to fuck with me, they can give it their best shot. I don't give a shit. Not every trans woman is like that, and I wouldn't expect most women to be like that, trans or not.
I feel like you're like talking about a lot of like the bad ways in which people treat you differently. And
when do they start noticing and you start feeling like, oh, I'm being treated like a female? And you're right. How much effort are you putting into presenting? And not saying you have to put in effort, because me, I'm like, you do you. But I'm like, when I took hormones for a year, and when I worked because of my job, I wasn't out at my work. No one knew anything. And then after I transitioned to work, I'd still get people, like I'd be in there full makeup, dress and everything, and get misgendered. Some of those people knew me before my transition, and they're like, guys who work on road crews and have met me twice in their life, and they remember me from the first time. Like again, what's worth the effort, But as I've gone further, and like I've like it's a growth process. You know, it's like asking like a 12-year-old, like, when did people start treating you like a teenager? And it's like, well, you know, as I developed, as I got further into my transition, that's changed. But yeah, it is great. It is like I said, I don't consider myself all that passable, but
really good.
When people do say stuff, it's like, oh, thank you. Even if you're just being polite, that's great. I appreciate that.
I remember like one of the things that I really appreciated was I noticed this a couple things very early on at the 3-month stage, and these are some of my favorite parts about being treated differently, which was that both men and women started treating me differently, but in better ways. Presenting male, I always wasn't really comfortable around men. Like that thing that they talked about like for a while, like locker room talk, it's a real fucking thing. Like men say they say horrible shit about women when women aren't around. Even like some of the nicest guys, you feel that even if you're not out, you feel that. And you're just like, oh. Even just interacting with men, like I always felt it was always adversarial to some degree. Men are always trying to one up each other. I had to constantly prove my masculinity at all times. Like I was in a relentless, endless pissing contest with every man I ever came into contact with. And like I had to prove that I was tougher than them or smarter than them. There would be an endless gauntlet of challenges. And that just stopped. And like men just started being nice to me. And like smiling at me and like, hey, how you doing?
I've had people like out of nowhere say shit to you at a store and you're like, do not talk to me.
Getting catcalled for the first time.
I think this is something people don't think about, especially if you're a guy who has a trans man as a friend or a woman who is friends with a trans woman. It hurts more to get not included in women things by female friends than it does to get misgendered by strangers. That kind of stings when they don't even think about including you and stuff like that. I'm like 52. I don't expect to be standing up in anyone's wedding as a bridesmaid, but I've been a part of shows where it's like women only shows. And never got asked to. I got asked to do one, and then when they put me in the Facebook group, there was like a Facebook group chat, and you can see all the people who dropped out and were deleted. And I was like the 50th woman they had spoken. They decided to ask to do this huge show, and I was like, "Oh, you didn't think about me at all for this." That is much more painful than anything a stranger does to me. So I would say if you're a dude and you got a friend who's a trans dude, include him in your dude shit. If you're running something for the women and you've got a friend who's a trans woman, include her in that shit. It'll make her feel so amazing. I assume trans.
I got real lucky with that stuff, and like people started including me right away, and it felt amazing. Men treat you differently, but women too. Literally, I think maybe my favorite part was the way that women started treating me. When you're presenting male, women have their guard up.
Yeah.
There's a force field there that very few men get through. Yeah. And it has to be there. I do it myself now. I could never tell a woman that I liked her makeup or that I liked her hair or that I thought her boots were cute. I knew I couldn't get away with it, and so I didn't do it because I didn't want to make people feel awkward or uncomfortable because they're always being hit on. Yeah. Women are always being hit on by men. The first time that I truly felt like the transition was taking place was when I watched that barrier go away and women started talking to me like women. They would ask me my opinions on things, and it was such a revelation, and it felt so nice. Like, that was a huge thing for me, and that happened pretty early on. I'd say within 3 months.
Yeah. Great question.
Great conversation.
Love it. Great conversation, sis ally. I love it.